Welcome to EdTech Speaks, a podcast bringing guests together to share their expertise and advice on navigating business and education in a technology-driven world. From entrepreneurs to vendors, higher education to corporate leaders, we'll uncover their perspective regarding the latest trends and technologies impacting your career or business. Our podcast is made possible by Downing EdTech Consulting, where people and technology connect. Hosted by Cher Downing, an experienced executive spanning a higher education and corporate career with specific focus on the EdTech industry. Dr. Downing is also an international and national presenter, author, and regular media contributor. Now here is your host, EdTech strategist, Dr. Cher Downing.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to EdTech Speaks, a podcast where we bring guests to share their expertise and advice on navigating business and education in a technology-driven world. Our goal is to provide you with options for products, services, and knowledge that can help you benefit you or your business. I'm Cher Downing, your host, and today I want to introduce our guest, Nick Lambert with Dock, who's calling in from Scotland. Hi, Nick. How are you today?
I'm really good, Cher. Thank you for having me on. How are you?
Absolutely. Doing great today, despite the heat here in Phoenix, Arizona. But as we were just talking before we got on air, you're experiencing the exact opposite of us with cool temps and rain. So we can never find a happy medium anywhere.
Exactly.
So I'm really excited to have you on today because this is a product that I think we all deal with no matter what realm we are in life, whether it's in business or personal. But you gave us a quote, and I want to start with that, which is, it's harder and harder to know what information is true and what isn't. So talk to us a little bit about how Dock got started and what your focus is.
Of course. Yeah, and I'll probably start with that statement, Cher, because I think most of our interactions are really online for the vast majority of us today, with some exceptions. But it's becoming very, very difficult to know when you receive information, whether it's a piece of news, whether as an educator or even as an employer, when you receive a diploma, a degree certificate, how do I know if I can trust it? You know, we all see these or hear these stories of diploma mills and things like that. And so as we move online, increasingly, it becomes very, very difficult to detect what is real and what is not. And that was really the basis behind starting Dock. So it's really enabling organizations that can be probably trying to tailor it to your specific interest in this podcast into the EdTech field. It can be largely universities or learning management platforms that we often use. How can they give their students something that's of value to them and that the student can present to someone else? And that someone else who's the verifier can actually know where that came from, who it was given to, and it's legitimate. And so that's really been Dock's kind of core focus for the last 6 years. Okay.
No, and that is absolutely true. As our audience knows, we've seen a lot of diploma mills over the years. We see recently, as we see people who are in high-level positions in government and throughout the world that maybe are CEOs, that suddenly there's a question about, are their credentials manufactured? Are they real? How have they managed to get through the process this far in their career and not have anyone, really pick up on it?
Exactly. That's exactly right. And that's been a core driving focus for Dock and my own kind of journey, which I think is the second part to your question of how did Dock get started? I mean, it was my kind of own history is, I'm not going and I know this is not a video podcast, so people want to see the number of lines in my face, but so I won't go all the way back to the start. But really, the kind of focus I've had for the last 10 years is really working on not only providing trustworthy information, but also enabling individuals to control their own information. That's been probably the common theme throughout my last kind of 12, 13 years of work, is moving that, shifting that balance of power away from large corporations, potentially governments as well, although I'm not anti-government, but enabling people to control that information for themselves. That's been a big focus. So today, when you're given an ID or some kind of training, it's normally from a centralized authority. and they control it all, and they kind of give you access to it and you can use it. But what if we are to move to a world where you attained some kind of qualification and that was sent to you and you alone, and you alone controlled that in some kind of digital wallet, whether it's in your phone or in your web browser or something? And that's a really big thing as well. So enabling individuals to start to control their information, because it's much more safe, it's private. And if you've got something in your phone, the chance of someone wanting to hack it and take it away is far less than if it's clustered with a bunch of other information on a server somewhere. So it's a lot more secure as well. So the driving force behind Dock is a twofold, really: giving the individuals authority over their own information, and then also being able to verify, like, what information should we trust online and what shouldn't we.
And I think being trustworthy and being in control are two major issues right now. And I'm with you. I'm not anti-government, but government hires people and humans make mistakes. And so oftentimes you get that letter from the government that, oops, we've accidentally released X amount of information, or we've sent it here, or your bank tells you, whoops, we accidentally gave out your mailing address. I mean, there's things happen on a daily basis right now, because the humanistic factor in there is that sometimes things just happen, combined with we're programming and we're constantly updating systems. We're not always given the luxury to pilot, will those systems work? We do the updates and we push them out. And so it's really a double-edged sword. People gripe about how many updates they get on their Apple phone, for example. But at the same time, we gripe if our Apple phone isn't doing the latest and greatest things. Well, there's a price to pay for latest and greatest, and that is an open door that somebody walks through and can gather information.
Exactly. And security is really hard online as well. Like, in many cases, like you say, people make mistakes, and that's part of the human condition, of course. Like, we're not machines, and that we do make mistakes, and like we all do. But I think security is really, really hard, particularly online, where you've got very talented people, hyper motivated to try and break these systems. And the problem is not only human failure or human mistakes, but actually grouping information together on servers en masse is it's too tempting for people to go and want to get that information and sell it, whether it's your bank details or social security in the US or some other information. Is worth a lot of money. And so people with hacking skills will go and try and target that information. But if you have that information held by yourself, there's no real reward for them at the end of the day. Yeah, they could try and hack you and they get one bit of information, big deal. But it really does a lot to remove the motivation of adversaries when that information is no longer centrally held. It's spread everywhere. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of benefits in addition to the kind of human mistake factors that you mentioned, Cher.
And I think in this day and age, we've become very free in giving out our information because there's always a carrot at the end. If I fill out this online form, I'll get a gift card, I'll get access to something. I think about here in the US, we have these little cards that, you get a discount if you, for example, go to Target or you go to CVS and they run your little scan and you get a discount. And so you think, oh, I'm saving money. Well, you are saving money, but you've also been put on a mailing list somewhere, and that mailing list has been sold somewhere, and it may or may not have been acquired properly, but your information keeps moving and moving and moving. And we started it innocently enough, just thinking, gosh, I'm going to save $5 by doing this. So the world has changed in how we think of what we're handing out and not really having consideration of where it could end up.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a free lunch. I think that's quite a common expression. I think that's true here. And it definitely did start out that way, where we didn't really know what the price was. Like, the prices are privacy, and we didn't really know that at the start, but you can't really say that now. There's been so much written about it, like a number of really interesting books. And so there is no excuse now that people do know that is the price that they're paying. And it'd be much better if we could get to a point where you just pay a fee, a subscription service or something like that, rather than paying with your privacy. And of course, the problem becomes even like bigger, Cher, if you think about, well, the coupon or the loyalty scheme that you were talking about before. Imagine that was something like a watch or a mobile app that tracks your sleep patterns or in your movements and stuff like that, becomes extremely intrusive about what you're doing potentially. not beyond actually what you purchase in stores, from which they can probably draw quite a lot of conclusions, but it can even be more intrusive than that, so that the requirement to control our own information is really increasing, I think, every day.
Absolutely. And oftentimes we see recalls of or updates that are as a result of this because someone has threatened to sue because their information is out there. That takes care of it. You may even get a little kickback from the results of a lawsuit, but it doesn't change that your information is still out there. They're not saying they've gathered everything back and cut it off. What they're saying is, oh, we're going to pay you because we made a mistake, but good luck, your stuff's still out there. So I think, that's something else that we often forget about as well. And I think now as we're seeing more AI really fall into everything, where things are becoming more and more automated, your information is moving around. I know that Dock also works with healthcare. That's another area where I may not care that someone knows my street address because Amazon comes here every day, but I may really care that my personal health records are out there somewhere. So talk to us about what Dock does with healthcare.
Yeah, so healthcare is a really interesting topic as well, because we all operate under radically different systems, like the in the UK versus the US. They couldn't be more different. But the one commonality is that it would be great if our healthcare data is some of the most private data that we could possibly have. But it's some of the most antiquated processes for managing that information today. So in the UK, there is a notion of digital records, but if I were to go to my GP, they still literally have a hard copy, like physical cardboard thing with bits of paper inside it, which is pretty weird in this day and age. And so, and also, like, who else is seeing that? That's lying around in a desk. It's in a filing cabinet. I mean, how secure is that information? So let's move to a world where we can actually potentially hold our medical records on our devices, whether that's a phone or something else. And then actually, when you were to go to a GP, a general practitioner, or some kind of medical practitioner, you could actually give them for a limited time access to only the parts of your medical history that were relevant at that point in time, and share that information for that point in time. And then after that period is over, then you have control again. So you're really keeping on top of who can access what and when. So that's the dream that we want to work to with medical records. And technically, that's possible today. The limitations now, become one, the usual fight between technology builders and then the legislators and compliance. The stuff that is still super important, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's not important. That is the stuff that takes time for regulators to understand, figure out. In the US, that's complicated further by a lot of private companies working within a healthcare service, different states as well, different privacy laws. And so technically it's all there, but in terms of the legal frameworks and stuff, it's got quite a ways to go. So that's kind of where we're seeing a lot of excitement within the kind of medical field. And likely there'll be areas that are not the US that will maybe be further forward with that, just because their laws are such that they can move more quickly. So that's one of the really interesting things that we're looking at as well. There's other ones. Should I go into those as well? I don't want to talk for too long.
No, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right. US, we manage to complicate everything. We are on an even keel. No matter what the problem is, we will complicate it. We can't even get insurance companies to talk to each other, or insurance companies to talk directly with our providers. If you're unfortunate and don't have any insurance and you're on some sort of state or federal type of support, it's even worse. Where your records are is anybody's guess. How you access them, can you access them? Even for myself, and if you all haven't figured out, I'm not a spring chicken by any means, but years ago when I had to pull some medical records to prove immunization in the US, and I'm sure it's probably somewhat similar over there, we have to have certain immunizations done when we're children, and had to have proof of that. And when I actually finally figured out where my records had ended up, because they had been physically moved so many times due to doctors retiring, et cetera, the woman literally said to me, it will take me 3 days. I have to go in the basement and I have to dig them out. And by the time she found it, it was a handwritten, basically Xerox piece of paper that someone had just handwritten out what I had done many, many years ago. And she sent that. It was difficult to read. One of the things we couldn't even read, we were guessing, hoping, yet, yes, I'd had that, whatever shot that was. But even from that respect, you couldn't keep track anymore because it was so damaged from being down there. So is that a health risk? Absolutely.
It is. And it's just also damn inconvenient as well. I mean, you probably had the wherewithal to actually know where that is, but a lot of people, like, that would be long gone.
Right.
Maybe it's in an attic from the previous house they used to stay in. So that's where, like, that stuff technology needs to be brought forward. So it's sufficient for today's world. Like, we all carry these computers about, or certainly quite a lot of us do, or we even have desktops or laptops at home. Let's start getting these to a place where it's convenient and easy to use. And there's other sides to the healthcare stuff as well. Like, for example, one of the companies we work with in Denver, actually, in the US, in Colorado, is they're working around a kind of issue that we also see in the UK, where it's for practitioners. They have great issues when they try and work in a different place. So when they on board to a hospital, they also obviously have to prove that they have the sufficient training and qualifications to practice medicine within that hospital. But if they, lo and behold, decide they want to move state or even the next hospital, that process can take many, many months, which is unbelievable. Yes. To manually verify all the stuff they need to verify, like where you live, your history, and also can I trust these documents? It takes a huge amount of time. And certainly within the US, and in the UK also, Sherry, there's a huge number of nurses leaving the profession because it's obviously really stressful. They've gone through some extremely difficult times with COVID and all that came out of that. So people are moving on. But actually, if you can start to give nurses the ability to manage their own continual improvement and training and give them management over those details, that's a much more powerful thing that could actually keep many of them in the profession and also make it easier for them to work in different places. Because, of course, people want variety in their work life as well. And so what Dock can work on with our partners, and this one specifically, is giving them control of their compliance documents, their training, in the form of something we call verifiable credentials, which is literally like paper credentials, but ones that are digital and can be instantly verified through, I'll not go into the weeds on it, but through cryptography. So you can know who issued it to them and they are the recipient of that and when it was issued. And so these are quite powerful things that we can start to see happening within the healthcare space, both from the patient side, but also from the medical practitioner side.
That's so exciting because we've seen a real increase in remote healthcare, where nurses are moving around, living somewhere else, coming in because there's been a catastrophe, there's been a situation, suddenly there's been a shortage. Particularly in the US, we're right now at the height of retirees. We have reached where one of our largest populations is now going through retirement, jobs are opening. And as you said, it takes a while to fill, it takes a while to get people in. So being able to loan somebody out, giving them the opportunity to work somewhere else is really, really important. But yes, getting them there, getting everything aligned. Teachers is the other issue. We here in Arizona have had a teacher shortage, as have many other states. And the problem is getting people, if they've just moved in and said, hey, I was a teacher in another state, can't just step right in. There's a process. Because we got so backlogged with the pandemic and all the issues there, last year they made the decision that they would waiver some of the conditions for employment to be a teacher. And while that sounds lovely because you can get people in, it also allowed people to apply who have not been a teacher, who are not certified in that. So now you're questioning the validity of a student's education. There's going to be repercussions of doing that down the road. And it's not that these people don't have a degree or that they're not knowledgeable, but they're not prepared to do the role they've been put in. And I remember one person saying in the news, that would be like saying, well, this astronaut can't go up tomorrow, but perhaps Nick if you're available, on Thursday, we'll send you up instead. It just doesn't work that way. So while they did it out of an emergency situation, having something like Dock in place would alleviate, regardless of what's causing that sudden dip in employment.
Exactly. I think as well, like even the example you were starting to talk about, Sherry, as well, with kind of remote delivery of like healthcare, and this can also apply to teaching as well, but also verifying who someone is. That's a kind of tricky process now today, and is potentially time consuming. So like if you're, again, like a nurse or something trying to give support, that would work both ways. You would want to know, as the nurse, who am I speaking to? Is this the actual patient I'm intending to speak to? And of course, right, the patient would want to know, look, am I speaking to someone that's qualified? And so having these credentials that can be issued by like governments or medical boards or large companies, that they can't be faked or forged or tampered with, they start to become extremely useful. And also within the remote education space as well. I mean, I know I've got 2 kids of school age, and it was particularly difficult during the pandemic trying to kind of educate them at home. But, as their classes started to kind of go back online, at least, just even verifying who people are and who people were and do they have the right to be there is also really important, so they can fulfill that role also.
Exactly. So on your website, and I encourage our listeners to take a look at it, and we'll give you all the information, wherever you pick up the podcast, but it is dock.io. But one thing that caught my eye was metaverse. So talk to us a little bit about metaverse.
Yeah. So the need to prove, like everyone thinks about identity, or not everyone, I rephrase that. Like a lot of people think about identity as in like you have one identity. And so I'm Nick Lambert, and that's who I am. I have government-backed identities, driver licenses, and our equivalent of social security numbers and passports and stuff. But actually, if you think about your interactions online, Sherry, a lot of them, you will have what I call identifiers. So you might have things that you use to access websites. So those identifiers might come from in the form of a Google username and a password. So when you log into your email, you use what Google's given you to log in, and they can control your access to it. But actually, when we start to think about the metaverse, that becomes a little bit murkier, because a lot of these metaverse services are actually wanting to pass that control back to the user. So the metaverse might not necessarily, as a company providing a service in the metaverse, they can potentially give you access to that, and then they can control your access in and out of that system. But imagine, like I was saying at the start, you could control that for yourself. So imagine you could have your own identifier that you create, and that you decide to use that whenever you access that metaverse. And you can basically control your own identity within that metaverse. And the metaverse, of course, is not one thing. It's basically like the web today. The web is not one website. It's not just Facebook. It's not just Google. It's all of these things. And the metaverse is exactly the same. But imagine you had an identity or a number of identities, because you could potentially create one for each metaverse if you wanted to be really secure, so they couldn't run the risk of tracing you anywhere or correlating you in any way. But you would basically have this own identity or identifier that you control, that you can use to access all these different magical new futuristic worlds that we all hope are going to be coming fairly soon. And so that's our vision for Dock in that field. It's the ability for you to give you the ability to create your own identity and then use that to access these services. And I think that's a vast improvement on what we typically have today and the flat web or Web 2 that we mostly use.
No, I agree. And I think things have moved so fast in the last 10 years that people have built lots and lots of new identities out there and lots of new things. And, that's where password protection companies have stepped in and said, because you can no longer remember all of your passwords, or you can no longer name them all after your cat or your dog. And so that result has been, we've been very free and we've thrown everything out there. And now we're getting a little concerned about it. We're hearing about these things in the news and we're thinking, oh, maybe I shouldn't have started all these things. And we've forgotten we even have things out there.
Yeah, exactly. And we're fortunate to some extent, like there's certain pockets of the world that they've started to take security and privacy a lot more seriously. So, and I'm sure everyone's sick of this acronym, but GDPR is a huge thing in Europe. And any company dealing with anyone in Europe, any consumers, at least in Europe, they really need to give the ability for that individual to request that their data be deleted, the right to be forgotten. So there's that process. But I think within the US, I think probably California is probably the most advanced in trying to protect consumer rights online. And I think you have fairly stringent privacy laws that are focused probably or based around GDPR. So I think in some parts of the world, they are trying to make that process a lot easier for people that have been a little bit like fast and loose with their data. And hopefully that's something that they can clean up. But it's certainly, like you say, it's not something we really thought about before, but we're certainly thinking about it now.
Well, and what's interesting is part of the drive in the US started as simple, the conversation at least, as simple as when people started to pass away who had started social media accounts. And all of a sudden you were getting postings, or you were seeing these people pop up and realizing, wow, their family didn't know they had these, or maybe there's no one left to turn these off. People started reaching out to individual companies and saying, hey, we need to have this person removed. And they said, well, you don't have authority to remove them. Only they can remove themselves. And of course, they can't. That was just one pocket of what started it. But then also as everyone started getting hacked, even just from the sake of false posts, different pictures. For us in California, where most of our movie stars live, they suddenly were getting these, fake accounts being opened and things occurring and such. And so it really just kind of became really overwhelming, I think, for a lot of people. But now John Q. Public, John Q. Teenager, can have all of these accounts as well and are now starting to see the same issues.
Yeah. I've actually seen the reverse as well, Sherry, where I've seen maybe family members that have had a bereavement and one of their family has passed away. And actually they want the account kept because they can look back at all the memories and see whether it's images or posts and stuff like that in some way, I guess, to kind of feel close to that person. And in some instances, the site's actually trying to shut down that account and the family's actually appealing that it's remain open. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting quandary. There's interesting stuff you can do around cryptography there as well. I don't even necessarily have the detailed knowledge of how it works, but I know that you can do things like when someone dies or before they die, they can actually they can split their access to their account into multiple pieces and share that with their family members. And if a majority of those family members come together, they can actually gain access to that account again. So let's say either 2 of 3 or 3 of 5 of those members can come back and then gain access to that account so that the family can decide what they want to do with that. Again, it's not held by and up to the service provider to figure out how they're going to play that. So again, cryptography and this type of technology is able to enable information to be disseminated or shut down even after the passing of an individual. So yeah, there's a lot of exciting routes that we could go with this stuff.
It's fascinating. And I know for our listeners, this is one of the things that we all deal with, regardless of what we're doing, because we are all online now, whether we have businesses online. So they have separate emails and separate websites, et cetera. We have our personal information out there and all. So talk to me a little bit about your Dock token. And I love the name, become a Docker, be part of the community. But talk to us a little bit about what that entails and how people join and such.
Yeah, so people don't really need the token to interact with our network. So there's kind of almost 2 parts to Dock. So I'll deal with the kind of easier one first, but basically the platform that enables individuals, the platform, just even substitute that with the word website, if that's simpler. And people can go there and literally create their own identities and issue credentials. And for the most part, it's organizations that would issue credentials. So whether it's a university, a learning management system issuing a credential to a student that's passed something, that would be one example. And so in that environment, for the most part, people don't need to worry about tokens because what we found is it's complex. and people don't want to have to learn it to use it. So we basically split it out and abstract that complexity away. So people can go to search.dock.io and start to, basically we have a no-code solution. So they could start to create their own identity and issue credentials. And it's all like free of charge, free trials and stuff. So they could go and play around. For the token part, Sherry, we have, it's got utility within the network. So we have 50 separate, we call them validators, but just think of them as 50 separate companies or individuals, each running their own computers that basically resource our network. And our network is a blockchain, which basically keeps a record of people who are issuing credentials on the network so that they can be verified, i.e. proven to be legitimate, is basically what that's for. And so if you want to use some services in the network as an organization, you would need to then pay the network in tokens. And so it's used for network operations. And like I said at the start, we hide all this stuff from people that use Dock. We kind of deal with it behind the scenes, but that's one of the utilities. And the other one is that you can actually vote on our network. So if you want to take part and have a voice in how the network is run, either technically or otherwise, you can actually raise referenda or proposal in the network and then vote on which ones that you want to see happen. So it's the very definition of a decentralized network where no individual Dock, even as a company, do not control what happens in the network, the decisions that are made with it. That happens by people that hold these Dock tokens. So it has a kind of strong governance framework. The final thing I would say as well is if you're one of the companies or individuals providing resources to the network, you're actually paid automatically by the network for your time and your services in these Dock tokens. And you can take these tokens to an exchange and exchange them into a crypto exchange them into another currency, or ultimately get them into some kind of fiat currency like US dollars, pounds, or euros, whatever you prefer. So you can actually have a real world benefit from providing services to this network. So that's the token, and hopefully that wasn't too complex, but we have some material on our website that people are interested in digging into that a little bit further. They can certainly do that at dock.io.
No, and I think that was a great explanation of it. And I know that we do have people that are very much in tune with utilization of tokens and crypto and such. For those that aren't, it's definitely something to take a look at. This is a really good example of how you can utilize and be part of a process. I think that is always the interesting piece of this, is being part of the solution and being part of the education of moving these things forward. Dock is definitely looking at what is necessary now, but also what is necessary for the future. And also the core value is in how to protect each and every one of us in what we're doing and where we're going. And for businesses, I know as a business owner, it's important to me to know where people are coming from and what their background is and how they really can do what I've hired them to do, as opposed to hiring someone and then finding out that they really don't have the skill set or the experience because their credentials were not up to par.
Exactly. And that's a great example. So, I mean, if you look at the employment use case, like, yeah, if you're a company, you're employing someone, and then you receive a CV, and then you ask for all the information. If I get like knowledge that you've completed a bachelor's in economics from university somewhere, if I'm properly verifying that as an employer, and I might have to do this multiple times for different qualifications or even checking your past work experience, I need to actually take the steps today of either paying a company to do that for me, or I need to actually manually do it myself. And so you're probably into several phone calls, probably a week of back and forward. And by that point, the candidate has possibly gone elsewhere. But where we are with Dock is that candidate issues a credential that you ask for as their potential employer. And then when you take that credential, you can instantly verify, who did it come from? Did it come from Harvard University or not? Did they make it up? And our network will tell you that, who signed that digitally. And also, was it digitally signed by the person that we believe to be the candidate? And then also when was that credential issued? And you can know all that instantly without basically any cost and any lack of time. So it enables you to move really, really quickly.
Where were you when I used to have to slit open envelopes and read transcripts the old-fashioned way?
I know. Well, probably the paper cuts were character building. So
that's right. So you have an offer for anyone that's listening that's interested when they visit your site. You want to tell them about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, we basically have a trial in place. So like I said, we do have a no-code solution, meaning that this is not just for technical people. We try to, it's a technical thing that we do, but we try to make it simple because that's really how stuff gets used and gets adopted. So anyone can go to certs.dock.io and sign up totally free of charge, no credit cards, anything like that, and just basically play around with what we've built. And you have 14 days to do that. If it's not for you, absolutely fine. And we'd love to hear from you either way, just to find out how you found the experience and why it's not useful. But for companies out there where they find verified information useful, and I think that's going to be a lot of companies, then they can obviously then move into a paid plan if that's something that they want to do. But again, it's very easy to use. And also, if you're a technical person, we have an API in place, so you can actually start to get things that scale very quickly and integrate with your own systems to the point where you really have to do very little manual work once you've set the integration up.
Excellent. Always love that there's an API in place, because that's usually the question that comes up 9 times out of 10 when you're trying to get adoption into an organization, particularly in universities and institutions. The very first question always is how do we integrate it? And if we can't, it's just one more system we have to support. And they get very grumpy at that point.
Yeah, and it's funny, what we found as well, Cher, is that the bricks and mortar universities have been quite slow to adopt this technology, and like they're quite entrenched in what they have. I think they're quite large organizations that maybe are not technology adverse, but they're probably quite risk averse. And what we have seen more success is, like I say, learning management platforms that are more tech friendly, that are able, maybe have less layers of management to get through, that are able to move much more quickly. And so we've found much more success there. I think the traditional universities will need to move, because I think that's just the way the world's going. But it's just taken a little bit longer than maybe we'd hoped. But I think they'll get there in the end. And then I think we'll start to see this type of technology, whether it's from Dock, whether it's from some of the others that are working on this issue as well. I think it's going to become really pervasive in all our lives. And yeah, I think we're going to see it happen more and more in the coming years. And in fact, even in the EU now, the European Commission has basically made it law that all 27 member states or countries within the EU must by law provide a digital identity wallet to their citizens by the start of 2024. So like this is now being regulated into law where this has to happen. So it's definitely not going away, and it's something that we're all looking forward to having, I think.
Well, it's exciting, and hopefully we are always followers. So when something happens overseas, we become vested, and then we think, oh, we should be doing that. So there's hope that the U.S. will adopt as well. It's been great having you on today, Nick. Anything else that you want to add for our listeners?
Yeah, one final thing I would think, Cher, I would say that you made a really good point before about trying to encourage your listeners to look into technology generally, but also on the point specifically of blockchain. What we encounter quite a lot is that it's gotten such a bad reputation, because like in any facet of life, there are people that are trying to use the technology for good, and there's people that are trying to use it for bad and to scam people. And the scamming within the blockchain world has really taken over the media. I don't think there's any more kind of bad people in crypto than there is in the regular world. Scam and credit cards is a common theme as well. But what is difficult to see is that actually people get put off looking into blockchain and crypto because there are bad actors in the ecosystem. The technology itself is agnostic. It's the people that are using it for bad things, but the technology itself is super interesting and very useful. And so my kind of parting message was, please don't get put off by some of the bad press that you hear from people with vested interests in the way things work today. Definitely look into blockchain and crypto and think about all the benefits it could have in your daily lives or within your work environment.
I think that is so true. And one of the things that we always talk about here in the US is back in the day, there were snake oil salesmen. And that truly was the first time that we started the scamming of recorded history, at least in the US, was the snake oil salesman who traveled around. And so you're absolutely right. It never changes. It never ends. There's always someone who's going to try to break the system for fun or break the system for profit. And we have to figure out how to live within that and not deprive ourselves of doing the very things that we want to do or need to do as the world moves forward. But we just have to be careful about how we do it and not quite as free-willing as we have been since the inception.
Exactly. Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Cher. Very well put.
So thanks again for joining us today. Listeners, as always, you know where to find us. We're on Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, Google, wherever you're picking up your podcasts. We'll have Nick's information on there as well as dock.io. But I encourage you to reach out, take a look at their website, take their 14-day trial and give them feedback. All of us that are in business love getting feedback, good, bad, or indifferent, from our users. So thank you as always for listening. We hope that you enjoyed this latest episode of our podcast, and we look forward to having you join us again next time. Until then, keep learning.
Thank you for listening to EdTech Speaks with EdTech strategist Cher Downing. To learn more about the services Downing EdTech and its staff can provide you, find us at www.downingedtech.com. If you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to share it. We'd also like to hear from you regarding any suggestions for topics or guests and the value you received from our show. Check back for new podcasts with featured guests at www.downingedtech.com/podcast.